Hi, everyone. Welcome back along to the show. Today, I have with me Ed Wynn. He is a fractional chief data officer, and he's also one of our associate team here at Cynozure. Ed's been in the business for a very long time. We're about to find out about this a bit more. And over that time, he's seen the industry change, evolve, iterate, stay the same. He's worked in lots of industries. I'll let him do a bit more of an explanation of his sort of background. But what we want to talk about in this episode is what's changed, what's stayed the same over the course of the last sort of 20, 30 years in the data industry, and get a feel for Ed's role in making some of that happen. So Ed, welcome along to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Nice to be here.
Cool. So yes, I've just said that you've had a 30-year career in data. Was I right?
Yeah, not far off. Not far off. You might have done me a slight disfavor, but yeah.
So you must be
close
about
enough.
40. You must be about 40 then.
Something like that. 21 again. Yeah.
Brilliant. Do you want to start with introducing yourself a little bit better than I have, and then we can get into what's been going on in over the last few years?
Cool. So yeah, I mean, look, career in data and analytics. Started in sort of software engineering, really, but data businesses that were using data. I mean, initially lots of unstructured data, working with media companies, so text, videos, photos, that kind of thing. Various different technical roles. Kind of came out of the technical space into solution architecture and got into more sort of business change and commercial facing roles. Worked for myself, worked for specialist data providers. Lots of times sort of served in the marketing space, CRM, prospect marketing, and all of the analytics and BI and data quality, data cleansing that goes with that. Right. A stint with Accenture where I sort of worked on what many of us call a once in a career project. So I was lucky enough to be part of the team that was doing the data integration from HBOS into Lloyd's when that that sort of merger was happening in the middle of the financial crisis, which you learn a lot doing a project like that, an awful lot. I then decided I wanted to do a client side role and sort of take day-to-day responsibility rather than being a consultant providing advice. So I joined Cooperative Bank, and various different stages of that organization's journey and my journey, really. I started in the data space through their sort of quite dark period in 2013 when they were in some significant trouble, which I guess most of the listeners are going to probably be able to recall, certainly in the UK. I was running the ops transformation program there, which doesn't sound like a data and analytics project, but actually it was, because the goal really was to take cost out whilst maintaining customer service, and you just fundamentally can't do that unless you've got access to a good repository of data about what's going on and how the work's flowing through the organization, etc. So it actually became a significant data and analytics journey. Did that, finished up as the head of data at Co-op Bank, and then decided that actually, I'd kind of run my course with the organisation, and they it was time for a change. So I set myself up as an independent, and I've been working that way ever since, as you said, with yourself and others. I sort of refer to myself as a fractional CDO, and what does that mean? It means I work with lots of different organisations doing different projects. Sometimes that's anchored in a strategy piece, at board level. Sometimes it's a more detailed sort of technology problem that someone wants some help with, but obviously all anchored in data and analytics.
Well, as I said at the start, you sort of got, because of all of that experience and working in, as you say, sort of client side, as I call it sometimes, but in industry, you've got, working on the outside looking in. Different industries, different types of work, different stages of maturity in these different organizations. You've definitely got, as I can see it, kind of a long-term perspective on the data space, what it means, and really interesting. I hadn't quite sort of connected these dots. Those roles that you had earlier on, whilst not badged as data roles, were kind of the realization that actually this sort of business change, this transformation, this getting out of problems, this trading out of challenges is actually, in part a data challenge that you sort of seem to have picked up on and run with.
Yeah, definitely. It's I think it helps being sort of from an engineering background, right? I've got that sort of personality where you sort of get down to the detail, and the details in the data. It sort of fundamentally describes problems, and I think, as we all know, there's more and more data being generated and captured in the world every day, and people are. I guess not finally is not the right word, but people are starting to understand the potential of that, and it's not just the sort of big sort of Silicon Valley players in the world that have cottoned onto that like it probably was 10, 12, 15 years ago. Data is a fundamental part of everybody's business now, and I think everybody's realizing that, and that's definitely one of the things that's changed. If I think back to when I joined Co-op Bank, there were definitely days where that felt like pushing water uphill, trying to drive a data agenda in a big organisation, and that's changed now. Everybody gets the importance of it. Everybody's at a different stage of the journey, a different level of maturity, but I think generally everybody gets the fact that data is so important to the business, and it's something that they need to be doing something about and investing in.
Yeah, that point there, I think one of the biggest changes that I've seen is, 20 years ago, I was working with organizations, we were sort of focused around business intelligence and data warehousing at the time. And at the time, to sort of get a project underway, you had to kind of convince people of data, just full stop, that it was important, that it had a role, that, insight was important, that the analytics, the understanding customers, all these things were important. And then once you convinced of that, then it was a case of, and now here's the approach to do it. I think there's a general theme and underlying understanding, at least at a board level and across an organization, that data is an important facet to an organization, and that something needs to be done. Now, whether people get it enough to then go and do something about it is another challenge. But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things I've seen change over the years is this kind of like just underlying understanding that we probably should do something. And I get that there's something here, but connecting the dots is then the bit that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a cultural change journey, isn't it? Data was a byproduct of something, whereas now I think it's seen as an intrinsic part of, and it's just given a lot more consideration. I think there's a lot less barriers to entry as well, right? If that's the right turn of phrase. You just talked about sort of old school BI data warehousing projects, right? We've both been involved in those. That sort of, as you say, you've got to convince someone that it's a good idea, then you've got to convince them to find the money, and the sums of money could be pretty significant, and the tools and the techniques and the ways that we had to work back in those sort of earlier days meant that you could disappear into a dark room for 6 months, 12 months in some cases, and come back with something that well, here you go, this is what you've got, and it was never quite what people wanted. And that's changed as well. That everybody's working in sort of agile DevOps and thinking about things much more in a much more agile manner, so that things are done much more quickly. Obviously, the cloud has emerged over this sort of time period, and given us access to so many different tools and techniques, and there's such a lower barrier to entry to actually do something now that's really meaningful. That I think that really helps as well to sort of change the perception of data. It's no longer this sort of, all right, crikey, it's not like building a new back office system or something for an organization. It's something that you can
just start, can't you now?
Can just start on, and you can get value in weeks if you've got the right the right plan.
Yeah, I mean I remember the sort of the days of spinning up, I say that sounds really easy, but putting together a project and investment to put in a business objects platform, and building universes and data warehouses underneath it, and then that was pre kind of end user tools like a Tableau and ClickView and those sorts of products that came to market and were bought by finance teams and marketing teams, and ignoring kind of the IT function to get something done. I think that's Do you think that's kind of, obviously that helped, I think, accelerate what was done, and it helped put, the tools in the hands of the people that genuinely were making, delivering the operations and delivering business change? Has that kind of remained a kind of theme, that there's this kind of tug of war between kind of technology and business functions about ownership, about who's responsible for technology, because that can still be a bit of a confusing mix, or has it sort of been clarified a little bit over the years?
I think it's tempting to say it's clarified. I think it's clarified in my mind, which is not necessarily
whether that's reality or not.
Where everybody else is at,
yeah,
right?
True.
I think there's still a tug of war. Right? So I think about sort of think about current clients that we're working on, as sort of as a Cynozure crew. You still get those challenges. Which bits should sit in IT, which bits shouldn't? Should there be a data function that looks after this front to back? And if that's the case, what role does IT have in that? Should IT take some of it? In which case, where's the boundary? Where do we draw the line as to what's an IT responsibility and what's a what's a data team responsibility? And then you've got that sort of the users. So as you say, sometimes you'd see finance teams or marketing teams buying solutions, and the problem with that is that you end up with something that's quite siloed and doesn't necessarily scale and work for the rest of the organization. But if you take that away from those functions, then they can lose the flexibility and the agility that they need. So I think that hasn't changed for me. That it's always a topic of some fairly heated debate, and everyone's got a point of view, and that's really good, because it means they care and they're engaged in the debate. And my sort of view on it, I always have sort of a similar starting point, but I think my overarching view is that there is no one size fits all. You've got to, it's fine to kind of have a blueprint, if you will, but that's never going to work for every organization. You've got to think about the organization's culture, what skills and capabilities they've got, and where they're trying to get to, and come up with the right answer. And the right answer on day one might not be the right answer a year, 2 years down the line. And it's about recognizing that and when's the right time to change.
Yeah. I mean, not to reduce the size of that decision sometimes, but these are just, in inverted commas, decisions to make, where you put people, how you organize them, who owns what. And sometimes that can be really difficult to agree if people have strong opinions, don't want to lose the control, concerned about someone else not doing as good a job, or whatever it might be, making things harder rather than easier. All those things come into play with making those decisions, but ultimately it's a set of decisions about what's best for the organization today. And as you say, what does the iterative change look like of how you might move things around going forward?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be forever, does it? It may very well be, right, okay, well, the best thing to do is start it over here, but we think in 18 months we're going to move it to here. That's fine. It's
how about more broadly the role of the chief data officer then? So obviously that is relatively new. We're sort of still saying it's new, and we've been saying it's new for a number of years, but it is really, and certainly in its kind of size and numbers and volumes of who's thinking about CDO, and if not CDO, senior data leader. Any kind of insight into kind of how that position, the understanding of what data leadership looks like, has evolved over the last sort of 10, 15 years, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think that the notion of having a CDO, 10, 12 years ago, it just wouldn't have happened, right? This sort of notion that you could have a C-suite role that was solely responsible for data in an organization 10, 12 years ago, some organizations, but you could probably count on one hand, the ones that you knew about that were doing it. Whereas, I don't think it's not universally called a chief data officer, because that doesn't always work in organizations. But if we think about it as the most senior person accountable for data in an organization, not everybody's got one, but I think you're probably getting on to 50% of businesses have got something, someone in place. And that's a kind of an involvement in and of itself. I think there's also a recognition that there isn't a one size fits all CDO, and it's something I often talk to clients about. Is it really depends upon where you are in the journey as to the type of person that you want to be in charge of your data agenda. So if you're early stage and you need to build maturity and sort of bring some structure and some discipline and some structured process really to the way that you're producing your data and your analytics and your reporting in the business, then you need someone who's going to be kind of a bit more involved in the pipes and plumbing, the engineering side of it, and can understand how all this stuff needs to come together. They're probably quite evangelical and going to be a sort of a disruptor and a change agent type person. But if you're at the other end of the journey where you're trying to just bring analytical products through, on a sort of regular basis and with an established cadence, then the type of person you need is probably quite different. And I think that's changed. I think people can start to understand and appreciate that. And I think that's because people are seeing different ends of the spectrum. More people have been on that journey and have seen the start of it and the middle, and they're getting somewhere, not the end, because I don't think you ever finish this. It's a continuing journey, but they've built up the maturity in the organization. And I think that concept and the recognition that that's the case has definitely changed over time. People understand that, and I think it's the same with other. I often think about sort of the journey that we're on with data, and it's and the CDO role to be a bit like the role of the CTO and the CIO. When IT became a thing, it was the same sort of thing. You needed someone to be quite disruptive and to bring some process and some rigor, but someone who's running a tight ship, and it's just service delivery in IT is a very different person than someone who came along and put the systems in the first place and built up all the capabilities around. So similar journey, I think.
Yeah, and I guess similar. You could say the similar thing to the evolution of any kind of CMO wasn't a thing a number of years back. It was heads of marketing, and they took more responsibility for digital. So I think all of these I think the data industry actually sort of almost beats itself up a bit much about not having pinned down what the CDO is and what the role is and where it should sit. And actually all these things evolve, don't they? They iterate, they evolve, they change, they move around in terms of the context, in terms of the seniority, in terms of what they're for. And as you say, the context of the organization that it exists in at a moment in time is really important, because the same organization 2 years ago and 3 years ahead is going to look different. So what's required and the focus might be different.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's where talking about what's changed, this sort of notion that I can exist as a fractional CDO, right? I mean that's new.
True.
That you would never have got away with that, or got away with it's the wrong term, but organizations wouldn't have bought into that in the way that they do now. And I think one of the reasons for that is because people recognize that actually what we need right now is a bit of this, and we don't need that type of advice and leadership full time. Maybe we just need someone to point us in the right direction, and we can access those skills and capabilities on a part-time basis. Or it may be they say actually what we need is someone like Ed, but we need them for 6 months, and then we'll probably need someone a bit different once we've got over that initial part of the journey. And that that might or might not be a full-time person. It might be another fractional person. It doesn't matter. I think the market skills market has matured that we can support that type of client requirement now as an industry, and I think that's brilliant, because ultimately it means that we're helping more people to do more exciting things with data at a more cost-effective price point, which is great.
That's a good thing. I mean, I think sort of nearly push back what you said earlier, but I'll do it now, which is I think you kind of overplayed actually how much people get understand what it is that they need at any point in time in terms of that CDO role. I think I certainly see that there's a bit of a lack of clarity about what we need, and what you end up seeing in job descriptions for CDOs is sort of a bit of everything, because we're not sure whether we need machine learning kind of products at one end or data governance at the other, or everything in between. And I think that's where a kind of that's where I think this is still new, right? This CDO thing is still new because people aren't quite sure what you need. There aren't kind of like 4 types of CDO, and you pick the one type of CDO that you need based on where you are. It's kind of, there's a bit of everything up in the air, isn't there? And some of that is about locking down what that is, locking down what is it, where are we, and therefore what do we need? And that's the sort of the questions to answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair pushback. I think, I think it's difficult, isn't it, that for clients if they don't have that expertise to know what they want, and it's probably a common mistake actually, is they just throw the kitchen sink at a job description and think that, well, we'll go and hire one person and that'll make the problem go away. Well, you are seeing less of that, but it's definitely still a problem, isn't it? Where you get these sort of all singing, all dancing job descriptions, and makes life very difficult.
You mentioned a mistake that you see organizations making there. Just sort of good to explore that a bit more, just more broadly, actually. So, I suppose let's try and be kind, but what are some of the kind of biggest mistakes, I guess, that organizations make in not just in the CDO thing, just sort of more broadly with data, and what are some of the approaches that sort of help get over that, I guess? I mean, so what are some of the biggest mistakes you see organizations making with the way they approach data?
So, well, I don't think we can overstate the one we were just sort of touching on there, is that this sort of notion of, I'll hire one person and that'll make the problem go away. Data and changing the way that you use data in an organization is something that's for me, it's a really big cultural change. And if the board and the exec team don't understand that and get behind it, and they're not willing to sort of really go on that cultural journey, then the value that you're going to get from it's always, in my book, going to be fundamentally limited and compromised. So, that'd be kind of somewhere near the top of my list. Don't just sort of hire someone and give them the problem and expect it to go away, because that's not going to work. But you do still see people trying to do that. Still too many people are technology led, so they say, well, the problem is we can't get our hands on decent MI and analytics, so we'll go and buy a tool and we'll implement a tool and that'll be fine. And it's never about the tool; it's about the people and the process and everything that goes around it. And if you can implement whatever tools you like, but if you don't train the people as to how to use the tool and what data is available, and that opens up another avenue, really, doesn't it, in terms of how good your data governance is, how well you're able to describe the data that's available for the people that want to use it. That's another mistake. So being too technology led, I think, there's so much of what I do is people and process related as opposed to technology related. Like there's a real clue there as to where you can start. I think starting too big is probably sort of, I would always advise people to try and just build things incrementally and start small, think big. But you still see people who just sort of, they've gone off and built themselves a data warehouse, and but what was the business problem you were trying to solve? We just wanted to put our data in one place. Well, okay, but that's not actually solving a business problem, is it? How's that going to make you money? How's it going to save you money? How's it going to make you more compliant? Right, okay. So I think having a really clear business case and a view of the business problems that you're trying to solve for, you still see too many people missing that really important step along the way.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's two there actually. There's sort of the sort of going too big too quickly and not
Yeah.
laying those foundations and sort of then iterating from those foundations, and then also not having a clear outcome in mind. Whether that's a business case, and there's people who approach business cases differently, don't they? But whether that's but knowing the point, knowing the outcome, knowing how it's going to help the organization, and then going too big or the other way around, I think. But either or both of those kind of pretty common, aren't they? We see.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's been over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, there's been a push for people to do. I mean, as an industry, we don't help ourselves with this. We love a good buzzword, don't we? And there's a lot of hype about things. So everybody's been talking about AI and ML and all that sort of stuff. And there's definitely been people that have sort of rushed into that without doing the foundations, and that's a problem. That the value you're going to get out of anything like that is going to be driven by the quality of the data that you put in, and people just missed out that. And it's easy to see why. Fixing data quality problems, it can be hard work, it can be dull, it can be boring, all of those things. But fundamentally, the value that you get out is only ever going to be as good as what goes in, and it's so important. And you see people just not give it the airtime that it needs, time and time again.
True, totally agree with that. Is there no sort of almost a sub mistake here, though, that is only then focusing on foundations for months and months and years and never really getting to any kind of valuable output, and then sort of ending up being just a big cost rather than a kind of the promise that data has?
Yeah, completely. And when I started at Co-op Bank, we sort of found ourselves there. Really, they wanted to build up the data management capability, and there were assurance and audit actions to create policies for things. But there were things that the organisation wasn't yet doing. There were things that were sort of almost like future-looking, forward-looking policies that we needed to create, and we did that because it was the right thing to do in a sort of highly regulated organisation where you've got these sorts of things. But if I look, it's always good to look back, isn't it, and think back with hindsight. And would I have done that if I was there now? Probably not, because what followed was a period of essentially creating policies and frameworks, which some way down the line, it was all useful and it was all valuable content, but it probably wasn't the thing that we should have done that added the most value at the time. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. You learn from it. But that definitely still happens. It's easy to sort of, particularly in regulated organisations where they exist like that for a reason. That the regulatory requirements are such that you have to have policies and you have to have standards, and that's I've come from that background. I understand that, and I really do believe in that. That sort of, it's really, really important that you get some policies and some standards, but write it as you need it. Develop it as you need it. So pick a problem that you're going to solve for, and write the policies and standards, whatever you need to solve that problem, and then build on it with the next one, and build on it with the next one. Don't totally go and start writing shelfware. That's not going to do anybody anything.
I mean, my sort of agree with that. My almost counter / build on it is that in regulated businesses, the business outcome, the opportunity is maintaining good regulatory control and doing the right thing by both your customers and the regulator. And a business outcome is we don't get fined, we don't go to prison. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, there's a reason for doing it, therefore it's valuable. I think the mistake, and I've seen this in some organizations, a mistake that can be made is just focusing on regulation and not focusing on data for the sort of the value add on top of the regulation, which is helping the organization perform and insight about performance and getting close to customers and providing the right products and services. How do you marry those two things? I think becomes a really interesting discussion and debate. what we're doing for regulation should support our ability to do things for our customers. Therefore, how do we bring those two worlds together? And as you say, iteratively sort of put policies in place that mean that you can try and satisfy both things. Not easy, but at least it starts the conversation of it's not or, it's and. So how do we go after it?
Yeah. And my sort of fundamental belief is that's what the regulators want. They don't want you ticking a box to say that you've done something just to satisfy them. It should be, good regulation should be about enabling a business to run in a well-controlled, responsible manner for the outcome of everybody.
Totally. I mean, even in non-regulated, we're talking about regulated industries here, and for people that aren't in regulated industries, they're like, well, how's that relevant? But even if you're not a regulated industry, there are things you need to do for good governance, good control, good, auditing and tracking purposes that might on the surface look like foundations and costs and not sort of value adding. But in the same vein as the regulator looks at an organization, when you look at how you run your own organization and your bit of it, that's still true. We need to be solid. We need to be foundations need to be strong. We've got to put the right processes in place. And whilst we are also focusing on some kind of commercial or stakeholder outcome.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't employ people without having a contract of employment, would you? So, and it's the same sort of thing, for me. So
yeah, contracts and governance for employment. That's what that is. Yeah. Cool. I mean, looking. So we've looked back quite a lot at your illustrious career and learnings from it, and the roles that you've had and the organisations you've worked with. Loads there. Sort of everything. In some ways, everything's changed. Nothing's changed in the way we've just talked there. But if we look forward at particularly data leadership and the role of the chief data officer, going back to that, where's that going? Is this like here to stay? What's your view? Is it something that's going to last forever? Is it just something that's almost a short term, however long short is in the history of time, but short term in the kind of short medium term going forward, or is it something that you think will persist and be a regular at the board level, like a chief finance officer is?
That's a really interesting question. So when CDOs first emerged, I can remember reading articles about the role and people saying this is a flash in a pan. It'll survive 2 or 3 years and then it'll fall by the wayside because it's not a needed role. And quite clearly that hasn't happened. It's we're still in the growth phase of the CDO role. Still, a lot of growth in that sector of the market. So, I do think the role might change. I think it'll change at different paces, and it'll change depending on the organisation. So, I think for me, one of the reasons it might change is because of the way that IT is changing. So, gone really are the days where everybody had their own on-premise data centers and their own software applications installed, and the role of the CTO or the CIO, depending upon how they're sort of labeled in the organization, was to look after all of that infrastructure and all of the maintenance of those applications. As that moves away to being software as a service, and you're not having to manage the infrastructure because someone else is managing it for you. You're not having to update your applications because they're being updated seamlessly, on the fly. I think the role of the CIO and the CTO will change, and that could well change what companies require. Do you then need a CIO and a CDO? And I mean, there's all sorts of titles in here, isn't there? There's chief data officer, chief digital officer, chief information officer, chief technology officer. I don't think anyone's got all of them. But do you need as much of them once the IT model has changed? I don't know. I could believe that could see a change in the way that organizations think about the role of data and IT. And I mean, let's not forget CIO, Chief Information Officer. So there's a clue there, and that we'll see the roles emerge and
I mean that's all quite a kind of the technology part of a chief data officer, which is obviously just one element. There's kind of the other bits, sort of analytics and kind of insights and I suppose the commercial part of the CDO, which is really about the use and the execution and driving benefit. Is that something that's, or almost treads on toes of other people, and therefore we've got the same discussion about, does the CDO and the COO kind of merge, or the CDO and the chief strategy officer, or the chief sales officer? Do you know what I mean? Is there a kind of like merging and toe treading thing here, or actually can it coexist quite beautifully in amongst it?
So I think that's one of the reasons why the CDO role has emerged, is because it doesn't work when you end up with someone taking that responsibility. So if the CMO takes on the data mantle, then inevitably data becomes focused on what data is needed to drive marketing activity. If the sort of chief customer or chief commercial officer takes it on, then it becomes about that, to the detriment of maybe operations or finance.
So it's the independence exactly, of the role that's helping.
It's exactly that, and it's the facilitation, and it's the fact that for me at least anyway, the best data practices exist when data is a shared service for all, and it needs to be, that's how it needs to be. And I don't think that need is going to change. You're right about the sort of the technology side of it and the CIO thing. That IT's in the same space. It's a shared service for all, and it needs, it's needed for a long time now, someone to lead that as a shared service for all. And I think the same's true of data. I don't think that sort of the analytics and the commercial side of it, it needs that independence, and it needs to be able to serve the different functions.
Yeah, I think that's why why I say we overplay and beat ourselves up as an industry about, we've got to figure out where the CDO lives. It's like, it's independent. It's shared service. Data's a horizontal. It needs to be someone that can influence and impact across the organization. So by sort of modern organizational design, if it sits in a function, it tends to be aligned to that function, whether that's technology, whether it's marketing, whether it's finance. So that kind of level of independence where it can influence. But also, I guess there's also much more creative sort of matrix type organizational design that means where it sits is sort of slightly less relevant, as long as it's contributing positively to the way the business operates and the outcomes that it delivers.
Yeah, I agree, and I think sort of 21st century org design helps that, doesn't it? You can have flatter structures and much more sort of matrixed relationships that enable that. I'd agree with you. Data, I see data as a horizontal, and I think that's definitely helped, isn't it? By the way that the broader org designs move.
Cool. Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out, and of course, we're being at the center of what organizations are doing. In some ways, you'll either consciously or subconsciously shape this in a direction, as we everyone in this industry will, in some way, shape or form. So look, Ed, really, really good to have you on the show. I'm gonna whistle stop. Sort of look back over 20, 30 years and learnings and mistakes that people make. And I certainly, just as I said before, I think sort of does feel a little bit like everything's changed, but nothing's changed all at the same time. So I think it's just sort of shift, and it's just sort of representative, isn't it? It's shifting priorities and trying to sort of grapple with this thing.
Absolutely. No, it's been good fun. As you say, a bit of reminiscing, a bit of forward looking. It's always good to take time to reflect, isn't it? And have conversations like this. So thank you for having me on.
No problem. And thanks again, and thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed that reminisce and look back over the last 20, 30 years, and hopefully it helps shape your thinking and what happens over the next 20 or 30 years. So we'll catch you again soon.